We're human, don't you know? Just like you are. Welcome to season two, the difficult second book or the triumphant sequel. In these coming sessions, we'll be talking leadership in all its complicated, glorious leadership and dot, dot, dot. So there's room for a variety of topics and perspectives to consider for your own experience and perhaps your ambition. In this episode, we're discussing resilience. I think a key ingredient in the leadership toolkit, yet can be somewhat elusive and a little bit challenging to build. And joining me for this exploration is Phil Hayday Brown. Now, in 2012, Phil co-founded the Spine Race. This is a 268-mile foot race along the full length of the Pennine Way. In the winter, I hasten to add, so not when the weather's nice. It's become one of the toughest races out there, certainly in the UK at least. Now, they've also started taking clients to the Arctic in Sweden. I didn't know Sweden had an Arctic, so there's an education for me. And that's a tour through the wilderness, passing through some of the most amazing landscape on our planet. And I can imagine that's going to be pretty epic, although I'm not sure I'm brave enough or fit enough. Phil, when not out in the cold, does find time to work for a charity based in London. He works on mass participation events in the UK, such as the London to Brighton Challenge. He works further afield, adventuring still, so climbing Mount Etna. I'm not sure that's a sensible idea right now. I've got a funny feeling it's going off right now. And taking people up Kilimanjaro. And not to rest on his laurels even, he also coaches archery and axe throwing, amongst other things, and delivers team building challenges in the Cotswolds. So a big welcome to Phil. And Phil, remind me not to cheese you off. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yes, thanks for having me.
So, no axe throwing today.
No.
No axe throwing in the office. Now, I have to admit to being super intrigued by anyone that puts themselves through the sort of events you run. I've got to say, I find them fascinating, absolutely fascinating. But what sparked the idea initially to organise or to start Spine Race as a company?
It all sparked from my involvement in a race that I used to help organize to the magnetic North Pole in the high Arctic Canada. And we did that race for about 6 years. And then I left the company. And a chap that I recruited there, he left not long after me. And he kind of came to me after that, missing the race and whatnot, and said, "Do you fancy doing something in the UK?" That was similar to what we used to do out there. And that's kind of where it was born. I said yes, and then we started looking around for something. We found the Pennine Way, and the rest history really. So we set it up to, like you say, in 2012, had 15 people on the start line, and a lot of people were watching, didn't think it was possible in the timescales we give it, but we had 3 finishes, which is all we needed to prove it could be done.
Yeah.
And then it took off after that, year after year, growing into what it is now, which is some crazy global phenomenon.
Yeah, and I mean, so I'm assuming the others dropped out through exhaustion or injury or
Yeah, I mean,
or
a number of different things. I mean, back then we didn't do what we do now. So now we vet every person who wants to sign up for the Spine Race because of the brutal nature of it. But back then we just wanted people to come and have a go. So we didn't really vet anyone. So we got a bunch of people who weren't really, fit to do that kind of race. So those guys were dropping out generally on the first day. And then even for your very experienced ultra runners, which we did have a few on the first race, even for those guys, it was still one hell of a challenge. And they were dropping out because of injury, generally injury rather than exhaustion, because these guys have got it in their legs, so they'd trip over because it was quite icy the first year. So there was lots of slips, so generally injuries and whatnot, but it's just a really long way. So if you haven't trained properly, or anything can happen on a long distance ultra like that, and that was kind of happening to a lot of people. People were dropping out like flies, and we were, oh my God, is this actually going to happen? And luckily, we had three guys who just managed to just get through it all and get to the finish. I mean, we had one guy who was signed up because we have 2 different length races. We have a short one, which is 109 miles.
Short. Yeah, all right. Yeah. In the park.
Sure, I mean, it's shorter
Shorter. All right, yeah.
than the full race, which is 268. So we had one chap who signed up to that. He got to the finish of that. He sat around chatting with a bunch of the guys who were continuing on, and decided that he would want to continue on. So he asked us if he could go to the full finish. So yeah, we said absolutely, no worries. And he was one of the finishers. So, he didn't even know he was going to be doing the full race, but he ended up being one of the first people at the finish. So there was two guys who crossed the line together, and he was one of them, and they were the first there. So just amazing that they had the craziness in them. We had the vision, what we wanted to happen, and they made it happen for us. So
yeah,
it kind of worked that way.
And it reminds me, actually, I was watching, I do some training with another organization for leadership and management. And we were watching a video about how, it was explaining Kotter's 8 steps, which is a process of project management, change management. And one of the steps is getting that volunteer army up together, the people that will engage and make that project possible, make that change happen, because you get them engaged from the start. So something new, you engage them with something new. And they're the ones that kind of make it possible. They're the ones that tell you it is possible. And it really, I was thinking actually there's a billion metaphors that we can get from adventuring and exploration that you can relate to leadership quite easy. This is why the likes of Sir Ranulph Fiennes can talk so much about leadership, and those that have come out of SAS or the Marines or something quite often go on speaking tours talking about resilience and adventuring and exploration and leadership and blah blah blah. But I hadn't thought about that metaphor actually, from having those early adopters, those early volunteers to give that a go and prove to you that it could be done, that it was possible, and have those 3 finishes. And like you say, that chap that went, well, I've done 100 and something miles, so I might as well try and do 200 and something. I mean, not to be completely wrecked after the first 100 and something, you suddenly think, wow, that's quite a decent effort, isn't it? To then say, I'm not so wrecked that I want to carry on and do it pretty much again, because effectively did it twice, didn't he? That's the second half was
again,
as big as the first.
And some.
Yeah. So, I mean, what strikes me is that determination and grit to keep going, but also then those that recognize that keeping going would be a really stupid idea. And I think in leadership, that's really important, isn't it, when you think about it? I mean, actually, again, coming back to metaphor, 3 finish and out of 15, which is quite, a high level of people that didn't. And you think about how many new businesses succeed and keep going after the first 3 years, and how many just disappear and dissipate after that time. And it's fairly similar, isn't it? In fact, I think the numbers, it's like 3% or something, isn't it?
I've never looked at it like that, to be honest.
Less.
But yeah.
But yeah, it suddenly went, hang on, that's making a connection as well. So what do you think is the role of somebody in a leadership space like yourself with your trying to keep your runners safe, or like the runners that are out there talking to other runners or walkers on those challenges? What role do they play in effectively demonstrating to others that these things are possible, and where do they get their determination from, do you think? Where does that come from?
Well, who knows? I mean, everyone who does the race, they do it for very different reasons. I mean, but the most common reason I would say was, it's a self challenge, because there isn't a purse, there isn't a prize money or anything like that. It's people want to find out more about them, and what makes them keep going, and what makes them more resilient, and after that first race, those who didn't finish, a lot of those guys came back again and again and again and again.
Right.
Year after year, they would come back. Even if they then finished, they would still come back to test themselves again, because the beauty with the spine race is it's different every single time. Even though it's on the same path, the Pennine Way, the weather is always different, which makes the challenge different. So it allows those who want to come back experience a different challenge and to test
Nice.
themselves in a different
Yeah.
way, to
Yeah.
see, to really push their own resilience and their own kind of self-reliance, because that's a massive part of this race, which kind of makes it a bit different to other ultra marathons. Is you are very responsible for your own well-being out there. We do have checkpoints, but we don't necessarily have marshals all the way along the route. Like a lot of big races do.
Yeah.
But so yeah, they're in charge of themselves. And I think people like that. I think people like to have that feeling of, I did this, I did it on my own.
Yeah.
I survived through it and I performed instead of just survived sometimes, which is always a nice feeling to have. And speaking to runners, throughout the years, it's given them a massive confidence boost in their normal life. So they've gone out, they've pitted themselves against one of the toughest challenges in Europe, if not the world, and they've done it. They've got to the finish, touched that wall, and the amount of self-confidence they get from that just lends itself to them in their personal life and their working life and everything. And the stories we've had in the past, people have gone on to do amazing things. Some people have gone on to, not so amazing, where they've thought, right, I can do anything now. So they've divorced their wife, they've sold their house, and they've buggered off traveling around the world. It's that kind of thing, stuff that people have always wanted to do, but never felt the confidence to do it. And, that's not everyone, but that has happened.
Yeah, it's amazing how confidence, most of this one isn't about confidence, but I think it's relevant to say it can be a real catalyst for change, can't
Oh,
it? Having that, finding
absolutely.
that innate self-belief that you can do something maybe that you questioned or didn't know you could do, that maybe unlocks something. Say, right, well, if I can do that, then I can do this. I'm wondering how much of a sense of perspective it gives as well, isn't it? Because it is, ultimately it could be life and death, couldn't it? There is that element of danger, that frisson of actually this is pretty risky. There's some trails here that if I fell off could do me real nasty. There's some things that if it's icy, then that could be quite dangerous. The weather, obviously, the UK weather's generally temperate-ish, but the Peak District can be pretty bleak, can't it? It can be pretty stark and
Oh,
really
yeah.
exposed, super exposed. So having kind of conquered that and then finishing must put other things into perspective. So kind of think about the topic of leadership, coming back into an organization and being stressed out about signing a contract or negotiating a deal with another organization or getting a good supply rate, that kind of thing. It must put that in perspective.
Absolutely. And like I say, people have come back to us and told us the stories of what they've gone on to do. And not only from the spine, but when I used to do the polar stuff as well, that also gives people, a massive confidence boost. They can go out onto sea ice where there's polar bears and get through that and survive it. The massive confidence boost that had for a lot of people, that they would then go on and achieve massive things in their old world when they get home. So, and it happened for me. Where when I was first starting out in the outdoor industry, I worked at a place up in the northwest coast of Scotland called the John Ridgway's Adventure School, and that place gave me a massive confidence boost in thinking I could do anything I wanted to do. So that led me on to do everything I want to do, and and I've since achieved that. North Pole, South Pole. Traveled around most polar regions in the world, and set up a business and set up an iconic race that is kind of dominating kind of the ultra running world. It's a dream, and it's from those early beginnings of belief and resilience, if you like. Because it wasn't all plain sailing. You always get pushbacks, but you just keep. You've got to keep just pushing forwards, just keep going forwards, and that forward momentum has served me well in just getting things done and making things happen.
Yeah, I like that. I think before we set the recording going, we were talking about resilience, and I think I commented on how I'm not a massive fan of all these mugs with "Keep calm and carry on" written on them, purely because I think it encourages that stiff upper lipness that we have as English people. Don't always think actually maybe I should pause and rethink. Like maybe your entrants, the 12 of them that didn't get across the line that first time, who actually had to say to themselves, keeping calm and carrying on at the moment might kill me. That might be, that could actually be an outcome. Certainly going to damage me, certainly not going to do me any good. It's right to stop, pause, come back and do it another time, or recognize that there's more training to be done, or make another plan. I was listening to something, it was a TED talk, I think, on LinkedIn that somebody shared about the power of grit and that being a real strength. And I agree. I think having grit, having determination, resilience is a real strength. But like any strength, it can be overplayed and then it can get quite dangerous. How do you catch yourself when you're in that space of, I'm feeling resilient. I feel like I should carry on. Or no, I feel like I want to carry on, but there's something in the back of my mind saying, hang on, if I do, what's that going to do? I mean, what's your take on grit? How healthy to you is grit?
I think grit comes from knowing yourself. So, for instance, the guys who keep coming back to do the spine race, that 1 year that they might have got halfway, the next year they might have got just past halfway, and what keeps them coming back and what keeps them pushing forward is knowing their limits. And that's a big thing on the spine race, where if you don't know your limits, I mean, it's a good place to test your limits. That's what we're set up for. We have a big safety umbrella over the whole race. So we make that environment for people to really test themselves. But there's only so much we can do. If you're in the middle of the night, on the middle of a moor or on a mountain on the Pennine Way, you've got to know your own limits of when to say, okay, I've reached them, I've had enough, I just need to quit. But next time I'm going to do this, this, and this differently, which will then make sure I can get past this bit and then get into the unknown again. And yeah, grit is great. I mean, for the guys who finish multiple times and then come back, find themselves halfway up and thinking, well, I can't do this, but they know they can, then grit is a good thing. They can dig deep because they know they've got it in them. It's just, for those guys, it's generally a mental thing that they just need to get through that moment of self-doubt and push.
That's it, isn't it? Recognizing what's
push forward and get it done.
Yeah, so it's recognizing what's self-doubt and what's genuinely a problem. You have to stop. Yeah, and it's the dangerous part of that, isn't it? Is not recognizing the have to stop is the self-doubt thing. I guess it sounds like you really encourage them to kind of run their own race, compete against themselves, essentially, not to compare. Comparisonitis sounds like quite an unhealthy thing for something like the spine race. I would argue it's also unhealthy in leadership, is, compete against yourself and make everything better, but better by your own increments, not the measures of maybe your competition. Or so how do you, I mean, is there something you do for yourself that actually recognizing it? Okay, so when am I in my own race, and when am I looking at the competitors and thinking, well, am I trying to stay ahead? Or actually, how much do you run your race yourself and compete against yourself?
In what sense? I mean, me personally.
Yeah, with the business. Take it back to business, because I think the metaphor is fine for races on the mountain. But when you're in business, it's very easy to compare yourself, isn't it? And to get into that, well, other leaders are doing this and other business owners are doing that. Should I be doing exactly the same or doing something different? So, how do you kind of keep on top of that?
Well, the funny thing there is, I mean, we came into this ultra running world not knowing anything about the ultra running world.
Okay.
So we came from a polar background, where things happen differently when you're doing stuff in polar regions. So we just brought that into the UK and on the Pennine Way, and we kind of ignored a lot of people who were saying, "Oh no, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this," and we didn't join the Fell Runners Association because their criteria to join was just so out of our scope of the way we wanted to do stuff that we thought, no, we don't want to go there. So we didn't. So we kind of decided to go our own way from day one, and just do it how we think it should be done. and it worked. I don't know whether that was luck or whether that was, just from a polar background, that it just added something different into the ultra running world that no one had seen before. And the way I see it is, that's where we found that little niche in a marketplace that was, swamped with so many races.
Yeah. And I suppose that's the key, isn't it? Is running, you were essentially running your own race. Like you say, you could have gone in with the fell runners, but like you say, that would have been replicating something that was already existing. It wouldn't have been something new. It would have been governed by rules that maybe would have hampered progress and hampered new things happening. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I just love to do. I love to do different things. Yeah, if there's a different way of doing something that makes it more interesting or more of a challenge or more adventurous, then I'm always up for doing stuff like that. So
yeah.
yeah, that's. I wouldn't say that was my ethos, but that's close.
I don't think that's a bad ethos to have at all. This thing actually is, yeah, doing what you feel is the thing to do and that you want to do that's creative and new. And like you say, give something to that world of it may well be that people in the fell running community were fed up with the same old races. And here's something new, here's just different rules, different methods. And clearly it's gone from strength to strength. So that's yeah, that's so how do you
And
keep
it
this
has
fresh? Go on.
it has spurred a whole new, like, loads of different races that have come
Yeah.
through since then that have got that adventurous spirit. There's other races out there now which are similar. I wouldn't say they're the same as us. They've kind of just thought, right, there's space for adventure, there's space for something else. No one's copied us. It's just they've had their own unique thought and thought, right, I'm going to do that because it's adventurous, and that's worked as well. And so it's opened up another door to allow people to come out and be adventurous and push themselves and have that challenge.
It has, and also it strikes me as it's grown the market in that way. It's suggested there's a bigger market than the original proposal, that you were coming into this saying, okay, there could be some room in the market for this. Let's get it out there. And oh, actually there is. There's definitely a market for it. People are coming back. It's growing. It's growing. It's growing. The fact that other competitors or other entrants to the market have come in has suggested that market has therefore grown, has
Yeah,
got big. Um,
and it's
how do you
growing
keep
still.
yeah, I was wondering about growth actually. What do you do? I mean, obviously, in order to stay resilient in business and to have a resilient business, and there's one thing about being personally resilient, but to have a business that can face the future and keep going and cope with kind of peaks and troughs of I suppose, the challenges that we have in this very, very volatile world that we're in right now. How do you keep things fresh? I mean, where did the idea for Sweden come along? I mean, why Sweden, and where did that idea come in?
Well, that's just kind of going back to the polar stuff that I
Mm,
love.
did wonder.
So I think it was year 3 or 4 of the spine race. I mean, in 2013, I led some chaps to the geographic North Pole. So I was still doing my polar stuff. So that was still an underlying passion in my life at the time, and I was still pushing to get out to the cold. So as a team, myself and Scott, who started the spine race, we went out to Sweden because he then lived in Norway,
Okay.
and Sweden offered massive kind of adventure trails and all that kind of stuff. It was a big kind of winter wonderland, snowy playground for us.
Mm.
And you go early enough in February, and you can get some pretty extreme weather and pretty extreme temperatures, which is what we enjoy, because you push yourself against proper limits like that. So we guided people through the mountains and whatnot in Sweden for a few years before we decided, we should do a race here, and now that race is happening. So it's going to happen next year for the first time, and it's weirdly taking on a very similar start to how the spine race in the UK started. So I've got, I think, 14 people signed up.
Get one more in your match. Let's hope you have more than 3 finishes.
and it's along the same. Well, you never know. I mean, it's going to be one hell of a challenge. So It should be doable. A lot will depend on how the weather's doing and how the snow falls early in the season, because if we get a lot of deep powder snow, then it's going to be an extreme challenge and very difficult to plow through a meter of snow for 340 kilometers and stuff. So it's going to be hellish, but it's just getting out there, and this is a way of keeping the business fresh. It's keeping it fresh for me. It's keeping it fresh for the people that work for us as well, and the volunteers. They get other things that they can link onto and get out and do. But it's also keeping the Spine brand fresh as well. It's not just the UK Spine. Now we're expanding out into Sweden. There are future plans. I've already done recce's in Greenland. We were going to do a race on Lake Baikal in Siberia until Russia did its thing. Hopefully in the future that might come back.
And that, I can imagine that. I mean, there's extreme cold, and then there's Siberia.
Yeah. I mean, out in Greenland, we were on the northeast coast of Greenland doing a recce, and it's a very different cold. Minus 30 in Arctic Sweden and minus 30 in northern Greenland is very different. The feel of it is just more stinging in Greenland. I guess it's a lot drier in Greenland, so the whole environment there is just out to get you, including the polar bears. Whereas in Sweden, it's weirdly it feels a little softer. Those lower temperatures, maybe there's a bit more moisture in the air. There's a bit more shelter.
No polar bears.
There's trees, for instance, because in Greenland there isn't any. And there's no polar bears in Sweden either.
So that makes sense.
So it's just, it's pushing every time I'm coming up with something else to do. It's just pushing that little extra for people to think, okay, there's a new challenge I can do. There's something else I can test myself against. Because it's become really evident that people just like to challenge themselves. They want to challenge themselves. They want that next crazy thing, but they want to do it safely. They don't want to just go off on their own and risk their lives. They want to do it with a safety net, with a safety umbrella around them, and that's what we offer. So that's where we're going.
Yeah, and I think again, just bringing it back into that leadership and business space. Actually, as a business leader, that's kind of your job, isn't it? As a CEO, as the owner of an organization, the founder, it's what next? What keeps this organization sustainable? Because otherwise we end up in that. I would look at the double S curve and think, okay, we get to the first top of that curve, everything's going great. Eventually, it's going to kind of tip over, and you will have people that, okay, I'm bored with the Pennine Way now. What next? And if you haven't got another offering, they're going to go off to another provider, aren't they? That's the thing. I mean, they'll probably do other races in the year anyway, but it's that, well, they know how you run things. They like how you run things. So therefore, how do you plan and think, okay, what can I do as a business leader? How do I keep this going down the line? So when you're sort of horizon scanning, when you're looking kind of further into the future, so however many years plan you have, how far ahead do you look? What do you do for yourself and go, okay, so if Sweden works now, that's great. Or Siberia would be a great idea. We'll have to see what happens with the war and all that kind of stuff, and whether Russia's on the good books or not, and whether they're still on the naughty step by then or not. It's what's in your head when you're going, okay, so how do we continue to sustain and grow the business?
I've got a definite vision for the future, which I see as my job. So, I set up the Spine Race, and I've now got a really good team of staff and volunteers who can do that without me being there, which is a great place to be. So, we've created that environment so people can thrive and they can do their job And all I need to do is just check in on them, making sure they got everything they need, and making sure we got the environment in place that they can do that, which then allowed me to then set up Arctic Spine.
Right.
So very similar will happen with Arctic Spine. We'll run that for a few years, and then someone, I'll get someone in and running that one, and then I'll move on to Greenland, and then so I've always got that next step, and it was going to be Baikal, but it's probably it was going to culminate in the North Pole, a race to the North Pole. So that's the kind of the final vision out there. I mean, even thinking even further down the line is a race to the South Pole, which I was involved with back in 2009, where I raced to the South Pole, and having the opportunity to do that again, but on the other side, would be amazing.
So you would, I mean, is that something you'd say, actually, I'd like to organise it, but also I'd actually like to do that one? Would that be, it's
No,
one of these you look at and go, there's some of these
I've,
I'll go, hell no, I'm not going to do it. And others you'll go, yeah, I'd do that one again. That would be.
I've done it. I don't want to do it again, but I'd love to. I'd love to, put it on so other people can experience that and get what I got from it, and just and move on from there and grow. Because every time I've done something like that, North Pole, South Pole, or Baikal, or Kilimanjaro, or whatever it's been, I've come away from it and I've grown a lot from that experience and changed. I think I've changed so many times over the years because your mindset changes, your goals change, your aims change, and and even going back to talking about leadership, my leadership styles have changed and that kind of thing. But in the early days, my leadership style was more of a management style rather than kind of leading it. But now it's more of a leadership role where I'm just looking after the people who are in charge of delivering, so, and making sure that they can do it. They've got everything they need to do it.
Yeah.
And I see that as my role now. And that's helping it grow, and it's helping me grow even better. I'm getting to the point where, I'm thinking I need kind of specialist advice now. I think we talked about it, to grow even more into that leadership role, that I can then do more.
Yeah, because you're going to be you're heading up a group of companies, aren't you? In theory, you've got Spine Race, you've got Arctic Spine, you've got Greenland Spine, whatever that looks like, whatever you call it. Well, this group of, obviously chilly races, let's face it. So, do you ever fancy doing something in the warm? Or you're all about the cold?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was all about the cold, but I like, and it sounds terrible, but I like kind of desolate, barren environments.
Right. Yeah.
And the Arctic tundra and the Antarctic tundra and the Siberian kind of backcountry and all that kind of stuff. It just has this massive appeal for me. I like deserts. I wouldn't mind doing something in a desert, but I don't do very well in the heat.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I do really well. I do really well in the cold. I operate hot. So
as a business, as a business leader, just recognizing where your strengths lie, isn't it? And recognizing what you prefer as well. Why do something you don't really like? Why do something you're not that keen on? And I think sometimes that shines through. If your heart's not in it, then I think sometimes actually the business tends to falter a bit because you can see that the purpose that the leader has isn't really felt. It's not.
Most people, when I start talking about polar stuff, it's very difficult to stop me because then the passion runs away and I just get carried away with talking about polar stuff and how I'm going to do this and what I've done before, and then people are just, wow, I can see you really like the polar stuff.
Yeah.
And that's where my passion is, and that's, like you say, that's what I enjoy, and what I don't understand in a lot of friends I've got and stuff who they're in jobs that they don't enjoy. They don't get joy out of going to work. They don't get joy out of delivering what they deliver and stuff. And I find that very difficult to comprehend. Why would you do something if you don't enjoy it? But they kind of in this mindset where they need to make this kind of money, they need to have that big house and that big car, and to do that, they need to be doing this. So, yeah, it's a tricky one for my little head to understand. But
there's a
I'm doing what I love.
yeah, there's a psychological phenomena called learned helplessness. And it's brought up a lot in people who are in abusive relationships, that kind of thing. Why don't you leave? That clearly isn't good for you, all the rest of it. And it started with a horrible experiment on dogs that were trapped in cages and given electric shocks and but couldn't get out, couldn't ever leave. And actually, when they started leaving the doors open and still shocking them, they'd learned that they couldn't get out, so they didn't run away from it. They just took the pain, they took the shock. And it's a mammalian response. It's like, say, an abuse victim's like, but I do think people in corporate life, whether they've got their own business and they don't kind of leave it because they don't like it anymore, they've fallen out of love with their own business, but they can't let themselves let it go because, I'll be seen as a failure, but it pays the bills, but I'm safe, it's okay, it's reliable, your heart's not in it and you're miserable. That you do wonder why you put yourself through that kind of pain. But I've been there. I was in a very, very cushy HR job, but I had a lovely, nice role. It was a lovely organization to work for. I loved my team. I was bloody miserable for a couple of years. It took me a while to kind of realize what it was. And I had learned helplessness. I was in this gilded cage of, but I've got the car, I've got a good salary, of course, if I spoke to any of my friends and my family, why would you want to leave? That's a brilliant place to work. Like, well, it is, but I'm not happy anymore. I'm not getting from it what I want to get from it. I'm not feeling, my heart is not full with my work, and my brain is challenged, but now it's a frustration challenge rather than a, finding puzzles and knots to undo challenge. I'd had a taste of something else as well, which I think was the catalyst. I'd had a taste of teaching. I'd done my MSc and I wasn't being able to use it. So then that had the extra layer of, it's really comfortable, but I'm not getting to play with my new toys. And I don't like that when I'm in this padded room. This is a beautifully padded cell of my own making, let's face it. And when I had the opportunity to be redundant, I ran out skipping, and I mean I did have a teary moment because I missed my team horribly because I loved them to bits, but I wasn't the right person to stay there and carry on and grow into be the next HRD, that kind of thing. No, same shit, different job title. So for me, that wouldn't have been the right thing. And I think so many business leaders and so many people in leadership within businesses get themselves trapped in those spaces, or they become institutionalized.
That's it, actually,
yeah. And so I think there's an element there, isn't there, of that's the flip side of resilience, isn't it? The downside to resilience is putting up with stuff you don't like anymore because it feels like the right thing to do, whether it's to get the mortgage paid, to meet the bills, to keep things safe and happy and stable in your home life, is putting up with stuff that you don't like, but you find yourself being fairly resilient to it. And that's kind of a downside of resilience, but also that does eat away, ironically, eats away at your ultimate resilience, doesn't it, in some ways? So now clearly you're doing a job that you love. You're doing something that you absolutely engage. Your purpose just shines every time you talk about cold things, which is just amazing. I call you Mr. Frosty. How do you sustain your resilience personally? So when you're feeling like actually things are really, really kind of like this right now, and I need to kind of bring it down to a more manageable level, I need to recharge, reset, get my mojo back. What do you do personally that helps you reset yourself and sustain that level of leadership?
Oh God, I guess I get a good talking to from from people that I respect, that I work with, and I know when things are getting a bit too much. Even though I love what I do, there's still a lot of pressure and there's still a lot of stuff behind it. And I wouldn't say I was a businessman. I'm not a businessman as such. One of my business partners keeps telling me, I'm a great entrepreneur, I'm this and that, but I just don't know it yet. And I'm like, yeah. And that's the chap I go to, if I feel I need a talking to and a kick up the arse.
Need your reality check.
And that along with just going out and climbing a mountain.
Right. Yeah. But I, as anyone that knows me well will know, I will sing the praises of nature as a restorative therapy, as a medicine, as a just getting your head straight, even if it's just walk around the block or going and stand with the hill just above. I'm pointing. No one can see where I'm pointing to. It's a wall. But if I walk in that direction for about 200 meters, I am standing in a field overlooking a valley, across to the race course on one side and across to hills on the other. And we've got King Alfred's Tower over there on the Stourhead estate. And it's stunning. It's beautiful to stand up there. And you can stand up there in any weather on any day. And when you come back, you will feel better. Guaranteed. No matter how crap it is up there. Because when you come back, it's not crap anymore. But at the same time, that fresh air, that nature immersion is such a great ingredient for that little resilience toolkit, if you like. So when things are getting a bit much, it's getting outside, isn't it? Getting somewhere, maybe somewhere. I think when they're at mountains, it's getting somewhere that make you feel smaller.
Yeah, it's just getting out there to somewhere which is massive, like you say. It makes you feel, I wouldn't say insignificant, but it makes you feel like, okay, this is amazing. It's humbled, absolutely. And it has a great it's a great effect on just clearing the mind and focusing your mind again and getting back to it. And I always need my cold fix. So generally in February I'm off in the Arctic on my skis pulling a sled. So that's another thing that I can look forward to. And that's a massive kind of decompress. Just get out there in the middle of nowhere in the Arctic and stick my tent up, get a stove on, and I'm happy.
That's different to a lot of people's skiing holidays, isn't it? There's no après ski when you're just out there with a sled and a tent. And then hot tub.
Nothing like it.
That was amazing. It actually does sound genuinely amazing. I'm a little bit softer than that, I think, but I'm dead keen to go to the north of Norway, to those see-through kind of things you can camp in and watch the stars and stuff in the proper dark and the proper cold. And then I'm still I'm a bit more of a glamper, to be honest. I'm soft. I'm from the south. I'm really soft. And I don't mind the warm. I'm actually a fan of the warm as opposed to the cold.
I don't mind the warm if I'm on holiday and I've got the sea, the sea 20 feet away, which I've just come back from Egypt, where we're staying in an Airbnb, and 10 meters away was the sea. I could go and swim in it whenever I wanted, and I did, because it was plus 42 degrees every day.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Actually, if you do run hot, that's quite uncomfortable, isn't it? To holiday when it's silly hot. My husband jokes at me, so we come somewhere hot and you sit in the shade all the time. I'm like, this, because I like to be somewhere cool, but when it's warm, I like warm cool. If that makes any sense. I'm definitely English. I'm definitely super English, and I frazzle. I'm very pale. I frazzle if I go out in the sun, burned to bits. But at the same time, I'm not a massive fan of the cold. Do you know what's really weird though? I love autumn. I just love seeing some.
One of my favorite times of the year is autumn.
Oh, it's stunning. And here
in the UK,
here in autumn, yeah. And we've been joking about moving to different places, and I'm like, no, I don't want to go anywhere where there aren't seasons.
Definitely.
Anywhere that has no seasons, I am not interested. Or anywhere that has only 2 seasons, like there's really cold or really hot. I don't want that either. No. I need somewhere to have an autumn. It's just like wherever we end up, it has to have an autumn, because it's
I totally agree. I totally agree with that. I love the seasons. You can't not have seasons. That's one big draw for the UK, because we have good seasons.
We do. We have amazing seasons. We're going off topic massively, but that's my
sorry. Yes.
Too easy to do, and quite frankly, tough. It's my podcast. I can do what I like. Lastly, though, is thinking about your teams and how obviously I suspect you role model resilience quite well, in that you take yourself off of a mountain, you go and restore in cold places. You do have someone to talk to when you find things are getting a bit much, and you just need that reality check. And as you called it, the kick up the arse, the loving boot, as I like to describe it. What do you do to support your teams to help them work on their own resilience and find their own way to maintain that sort of that level of equilibrium when things get a bit tough, to kind of stop and check and restore and check they're okay and self-check?
So I mean, to start with, so we've got different teams, different departments, as I would call them, in the spine race, and we have department heads. And one thing I do probably too much of is I give people space. I give people their own space to do their own thing and to make it theirs. So they have ownership over, what they're doing during the races and whatnot, and even when the races aren't on. So we have a lot of contractors who, they work for us throughout the year, not all the time, 1-2 days a month and that kind of thing. So they have real ownership into their area of the spine race, and they always know, that I've done this from the beginning, so I've done their job. So if they ever need help, they know they can come to me, and I hope I like to think I'm quite approachable in that sense. And all my team leaders, they're I touch base with them on occasion and just run through everything that that let them kind of control the narrative of the conversation we're having, and just support them until, which I hate doing, until they find a point where they can't continue and they just need you to tell them what to do.
Okay.
Which doesn't happen that often, but sometimes if shit is hitting the fan on the race, then just needs a little bit of nudge in the right direction for focus, and that's why I'm there in the way I see it. I've never been a micromanager. I don't like micromanagers. I think that is just the wrong approach, and he'd probably kill me for saying this, but the chap I set the spine up with was a micromanager, and he couldn't handle letting go of the reins when we were getting bigger.
It's immensely stressful though, isn't it, to have that, to feel like you've got all of that responsibility that you can't delegate or empower anyone else.
Yeah.
Pressure and the stress that brings, and you bring it on yourself, but ultimately it's
absolutely,
for all good intentions. It's still,
so,
yeah.
Well, I had to find other ways of kind of making him step back.
Yeah.
So saying, okay, we're growing. We need to take a little step back, and we need to do this. We need to do this, and try and invent another thing for us to do to let the guys that we put in charge of departments to get on with their job. But every time I turn my back, he'd be there looking over their shoulder and trying to micromanage them again. And and it was massively stressful for the team leaders.
Yeah.
And for me, because
for all of them.
Most of the time I'd be managing him instead of trying to grow the spine rate.
It's funny though. I think I mean, prior to the discussion around the micromanagement, you had leadership in a nutshell there. It's that setting the direction and having the ideas and you're being creative in that space and creating that sense of purpose and engagement, but empowering others to do what they're good at, empowering them, and then letting them to go and do it is that's so important, isn't it? They feel like they have ownership and mastery of the stuff they're experts in or good at it, or even if they're still learning, there's people around them to support and help. And then your role as a leader is it's that directional stuff. It's that motivation, that inspiration. Yes, there's support when it's needed, but it's recognizing that you come in when it's needed, not before. Because then that's the middling, isn't it? That's the dibbling and the getting
absolutely. I mean,
even not invited. They just want to back you off and tell you to go away, don't you? I always used to say to my team when they were very good. Actually, I've got to say we had a very lovely relationship. That quite often they would just say, "Bugger off, Rachel, with the greatest love. We've got this." And when they could say that to me said, right, I like I'm doing something right here. When my team feel like they can say that to my face, "Bugger off, we've got this," was like, wow, okay, that's that. I must be doing something right here. And at one point, we managed to get to it with our HRD. She was very, I trust you guys. You are the experts in this. She was amazing in that space because, when we needed something or something was hitting the fan, we'd trot into her office and say, "Can we pick your brains on this? Because we need a sense of guidance. Maybe the organization's got some protocols. It's something we haven't encountered before." Because in HR, let's face it, you encounter all sorts. So that was, amazingly different.
Even when they do fail, because that happens. Even when they do screw up and fail, it's not not to kind of come down heavy and say, "Oh, what a waste of space you are." It's just say, right, okay,
Okay, what can we do?
What we're going to do next time? Let's make this happen better next time. That kind of
How
thing.
can we
And
fix this, and what can we do differently?
yeah, absolutely. And that in any event organization, nothing ever goes to plan really. So it's all about just thinking on your feet. And sometimes you get that wrong, and it's a given, and it can happen all the time, and it does happen. And I like to think that we set an environment where people, it's not great to fail, but it's, if you do that, it's not a case
okay.
of they need to really
Yeah.
worry about it, because I know the people that are in my team, they'll give themselves a harder time than I can ever give them. So I'm there for support. If they've screwed up, I'm just consoling them, saying, don't worry about it, stop giving yourself a hard time, it'll all be good, let's just
We'll
crack
find
on.
a way, let's find a solution, let's work together. And
that kind of thing works best.
that's the key ingredients to resilience, isn't it? You do not build resilience if you only ever stay in your comfort zone. If you never stepped out of your comfort zone, you wouldn't
No.
know you had resilience at all, would you? It's only when you're tested that you realize, oh, I lived through this, that's okay, I managed that, I was okay. And then nothing horrible has happened, or even if something horrible happened, I've managed it, I've lived through it, I've coped with it, and now things have calmed down again. The next time something like that happens, if it happens again, I know that I can deal with it.
Yep.
And it builds and builds and builds that way. But friends of mine will laugh when I say this, but I used to say twanging the elastic of your comfort zone all the time, just testing the perimeters like a velociraptor if you feel like doing that. But really kind of twanging that elastic until it becomes big and baggy like a pair of comfy pants. And then you're going to have to buy some tighter elastic because your comfort zone's got so much bigger. And there's an awful thing I couldn't possibly do that. So, well, did you learn to drive? Were you comfortable when you started learning to drive? No, I was terrified. Yet you'll drive anywhere now. Oh yeah, I suppose so. Suddenly you think you have done these things. You've done these things in the past. You learned to walk. You might have learned to ride a bike. That was scary. You might have done all sorts, learned to ride a horse, or done gymnastics and learned to do a backflip, which would have been terrifying to start to throw yourself backwards and trust that your hands would land. I definitely couldn't do it now. Just lots of different stuff that you've done all throughout your life that we don't stop and recognize has been expanding our comfort zones over and over, going on an airplane for the first time. All of that stuff is just pushing on that elastic until it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, isn't it? Now, some people have gigantic comfort zones, let's face it. Bungee jumping and base jumping and those fly suits, those things they jump off mountains and start flying around in these like squirrel suits. Incredible. I think that must be an amazing feeling. I do not fancy trying it myself. So
no, I always see it as a wise man once said to me, although he used to come out with good stuff but never lived by it, which is a shame. Which was stretching, not cruising, which is a similar thing.
Yes,
always pushing yourself. Never sit back on your laurels and think, okay, well, this is really good. Just keep pushing.
And twanging, not breaking. I think I would say twanging, not breaking. So don't push your comfort zone or your elastic to the point where it's going to snap, because that's when you get burnouts, you get overwhelmed, that's when you get all this stuff happening, and that's when accidents happen when it comes to joining the spine race, for example. I'll push myself out the comfort zone and sign up to the next one. No, because I wouldn't be fit enough.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Obviously,
I don't want to break the elastic. Yeah.
No, absolutely. Exactly. That would break my elastic. I would maybe last half of the first day walking. Because then I'd be like, it's too cold, it's too this, it's too that, and I know my limits. But actually, if I were determined enough, I would test my comfort zone. I would stretch my comfort zone by doing some training walks in some fairly exposed places, a little bit more challenging than walking around the Stourhead estate around near here, or going out around Durham Park. Ultimately, then I'd move on to the Brecon Beacons, then maybe Snowdon, and then get to, all right, now I might even start doing a little bit of running. That's you'd build up to it, wouldn't you? But each time you're stretching it that little bit further, and then
absolutely. They go always stretching. So you never get to that comfort zone, so you're always stretching. Is how I see it.
Yeah. I think we'll leave that as our parting thought is keep stretching, no breaking. Stretch,
no breaking, no cruising, no breaking.
No cruising. Keep twanging. Whatever works for you to keep testing that little bit more. without pushing yourself into that overwhelm space, and having those ways to reset and recharge. So actually, ironically, your reset and recharge, your version of that is somebody else's somebody else's challenge, isn't it? To go climb a mountain, to go pull a sled across somewhere cold, and camp outside in the snow. I mean, that's testing in itself for a lot of people.
I always get a good night's sleep when I camp in a tent.
Amazing. I genuinely don't.
In the snow.
But there we go. Horses, I will say. Thank you so much. Now we can do a bit of a plug. So obviously people may be curious, and I don't know whether I've got any ultra runners or adventurers or people that are keen on joining into something like the Spine Race or your new race, because you've just opened up the Sweden one, haven't you? So you're still taking applications for that?
Yeah, we're still taking applications for that. Like I said before, we've got 14 people signed up. It's happening in early February next year. And I have enough people now to make it happen. So anyone who comes on now, you know, it's a definite that the actual race is gonna happen. And yeah, you know, just go to, you know, the spinerace.com website, and all the information's on there.
Amazing.
All the races, so the UK race.
Yes, I will put the links in the show notes. So anyone's just got a clicky link, they can go straight to it. And yeah, why not, you know, if you want to really test yourself, either try the Spine Race in the Peak District, or if you're really determined and fit enough to do it, have a think about Sweden. When is Sweden, by the way?
When?
Yeah.
It starts on the 6th of February, 2024.
Oh, that's not that far away then, is it? Wow, that's
not really.
Yeah, that's quite short. So I would imagine preparation for that's quite intense.
It can be, yeah. I mean, if you know, I'm not doing the same thing as I did with the first ever Spine Race. So the people who are coming on to do the Arctic Spine, you know, they're being vetted to make sure that, you know, they have the abilities to be able to come and do this without me worrying too much.
Yes. It's just like, I just fancy doing it. I've never done a day of exercise in my life. I'm going to go and do this. I'm going to go and do an Arctic Spine Race, don't you know, in Sweden. So,
yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe start.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah. Oh, no, do you know what? I wouldn't. I've had friends that have decided to go and, you know, they would put themselves in for the ballot for the London Marathon, having not run a step and not being willing to train for it. Just think, I'll be all right. I know, no, you won't. No.
Yes, people underestimate distance. They really do.
Yeah, and it's you know, as you say, actually go and, if you haven't run for ages, go and run a mile and then realize how long a mile really is. You know, I'll do a dog walk around the town and think, oh, I must have walked a couple of miles. I'll come back and look on I've got the Trundle app, which I'll put a link in the notes. It gives to charity every time you walk. For every step you take, it gives,
that's cool,
to charity here and there. So I will put that out there. But ultimately, when I come back, this is 1.8 kilometers. I'm like, well, that's only just over a mile. So clearly, although I feel like I've been out with the dogs forever, although they sniff everything, so it takes me hours. But you know, it's very difficult to kind of gauge distance, particularly when you're doing a circular route or a wiggly route or something like that. You feel like you're walking for ages, and actually you've not covered much distance at all. So yes,
you don't need to cover
that. If you are super fit and experienced in very cold weather, walking and hiking across quite extreme temperatures, is it running or is it a walking, drag your stuff with you race in Sweden?
It's skis really.
Okay,
skis or snowshoes, because if you don't have those, you'll sink too much.
You'll get stuck, and that'll be that, right? Snowshoes. So hard going either way. Thank you so much, Phil. I think we've covered. I mean, we have covered resilience. We've covered grit. We've covered Arctic exploration, which I didn't expect to be talking about. My humble little podcast. Thank you so much. This has been an absolute hoot. If you liked that, please do click subscribe wherever you happen to be listening, and do have a listen to some of the others that are already out. We have been talking about entrepreneurialism. We've been talking about psychology and ethics, which ironically is more interesting and humorous than you might think. So have a listen to them all. Yeah, have a go, Phil. Thank you again. And yeah, thanks for listening.